Good evening. Please stand for the national anthem.
Grateful Father, soul the sea, from which our pride is grown, a pride that makes no wanton boast of what it has bestowed, that rise our hearts from coast to coast, the pride of nationhood. We loyal sons and daughters to hear my name known. These fields and hills beyond recall are now our very own. We write our name on history's page with expectations great. Street guardians of our heritage, firm cast with our faith.
Thank you. Please be seated. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, those of you here present with us at the St. George Secondary School and those joining us online. My name is Crystal Austin. I'm from the Public Affairs Department. It is my honor and pleasure to be your moderator this evening for today's session entitled The Influence of Climate on Agriculture and Human Health. We have a very well-experienced panel here for you to discuss, to interrogate this very important topic, even as we remain mindful of the fact that we are still very much within the hurricane season of 2023. Allow me to introduce to you our panelists, but before I do that, I just want to ask those of you who are here in the room, please put your mobiles on silent if you have not already done so. We also ask that you reserve your questions until the end of the panel discussion. We begin with the introductions, starting with my immediate right, my colleague to my immediate right, Mr. Brian Murray. Mr. Murray is the Deputy Director of the Barbados Meteorological Services, which he joined in 1998. He started out as a meteorological assistant, and over the years his job has included observing, recording, and disseminating reports of routine weather conditions on an hourly basis and assisting senior personnel in the collection of synoptic and upper air data for forecasting purposes. In addition to this, his experience, including his skills in electronic servicing and repairs, have become a very valuable asset at the Barbados Meteorological Services. He holds a bachelor's degree in meteorology and electronics, and he is here to lend his very deep and concise expertise as Deputy Director of our Met Services on this very important panel discussion. Please put your hands together for Mr. Murray. Next to Mr. Murray is his colleague from the Barbados Meteorological Services, Cherise Brathwaite. Ms. Brathwaite is a meteorologist by profession, has been since February 2021. She developed an interest in meteorology during the historic 2005 Atlantic hurricane season, subsequently graduated from the University of the West Indies with her bachelor's. She is currently a member of the Climate Committee which is responsible for climate services at the Barbados Meteorological Services and the publication of the Barbados Climate Outlook newsletter, Beacon. She's also the focal point with the World Meteorology, say that 5 times fast, Organization for Climate Services at the Barbados Meteorological Services, and is currently working on extreme heat and its repercussions on the public. Put your hands together for Ms. Brathwaite. I'm sure her research on the heat is saturated with data right now. Next up, we have Dr. Kenneth Connell. He received his university and postgraduate training in medicine from the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine and Cave Hill campuses. He graduated with his MB.BS and a DM in internal medicine in 2000 and 2006, respectively. He was awarded a Barbados National Development Scholarship in 2007. Subsequently, he gained a doctorate in philosophy from King's College London. He joined the Faculty of Medical Sciences as a lecturer in clinical pharmacology in 2011 and assumed the duties of Deputy Dean Phase 1 in August 2014. He's a consultant physician at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and consultant in charge of the hospital's respiratory hypertension clinic. He also sits on the Barbados Pharmacy Council as a representative of BAMP, the Barbados Association of Medical Practitioners. Please welcome Dr. Kenneth Connell. And last but not least, we have Mr. James Paul, who is no stranger to us all, fierce defender of the agricultural sector. And the Barbados Agricultural Society, as you know, is a conglomerate of a number of cooperatives, which include agencies that represent the farmers in the area of pig farming, vegetables and fruit, poultry, and so on. He is, as I said, a very well-recognized face within the sphere of agriculture, speaking pointedly on a regular basis on matters affecting the sector, and we do look forward, Mr. Paul, to your contribution today on this very important panel discussion topic. Put your hands together and welcome Mr. Paul. Our topic again today is the influence of climate on agriculture and human health. We want to encourage all of you to be as participative as you can. These sessions have been created essentially to ensure that we create that two-way communication between the public and the Barbados Meteorological Services. This session is also facilitated by the Department of Emergency Management, and we also recognize the presence of the representatives of the district emergency organizations. All of these partners and players come together to ensure that you are able to contribute to the thought process that we undergo to strengthen our hurricane preparedness efforts each year. And certainly, this year is no exception. We will begin with our colleagues at the Barbados Meteorological Services. Mr. Murray, let's start with you. We always like to begin these sessions by breaking down some of the lingo that is used within the weather field or the meteorology business. Some of these words sometimes we take for granted that we hear them so often, but we may not necessarily be able to distinguish between them. For example, weather versus climate. Could you break down for us the difference, or is there a difference between weather and climate?
First of all, I want to say a blessed good afternoon to you, Crystal, and to the panel to my right, to the live audience, and to those online. So yes, there is a difference between weather and climate, and there are times when we do tend to get them mixed up. So weather is basically the state of the atmosphere as it is right now, whether it is within the hour or within 6 hours or within 12 hours. That is the state of the sky. And if we thought, well, is it sunny or is it hot as it is right now? And as you can see, I am sweating at the moment because it is very hot outside. Climate now is weather, the average weather on a more longer period, and that is usually 30 years. And that is based on our climatological average, which is 30 years. So our averages that we have on our website are from 1991 to 2020. So that is the difference between weather and climate. Climate is the average weather over 30 years, and weather is the state of the sky as of right now.
All right, so let's get into the language or the discussion of rainfall and what is considered above and below normal.
Okay, when we talk about above and below normal, so let's have a scenario where we measure rainfall every day for 30 years. And we divide that by the amount of days, and that would be considered the average. So for instance, like for September now, for my notes, the average is 162.6 millimeters. It will not matter if we have in June an El Nino or La Nina, because there are years that are going to be different in terms of when the rain is going to fall or not. You will have a case where you're going to have tropical cyclones passing through, which will spike the rainfall total at the airport, or you can have a situation where you're going to have a drought and the rainfall will be less. So for September 2023, we only had 40.1 millimeters, which is very low. So,
Okay, I'm going to have to ask you to lean in or pull your mic a little bit closer to you. Not sure if others are having a little difficulty hearing. You were speaking about September.
40.1 millimeters for September, it is considered to be below normal by far.
Right, so having contextualized climate and rainfall, we are in a period right now where we are hearing this phrase climate change a lot. So based on your definition, we're looking at a 30-year period with respect to climate. And the argument, therefore, by the persons who would want to educate us about climate change is that this current period that we're in compared to, say, 30 years before is experiencing a significant transformation, yes?
What I can say is that it will probably take a few more years now before we can determine that it is climate change, because you have to understand that there are cycles. You have to remember that we have the El Nino and La Nina phenomena, which they tend to flip every 3 to 4 years. So we can have a situation where we're going to have lots of rainfall in 1 year because of La Nina, and then on the other hand, then we have an El Nino. This year we have an El Nino, which means that...
What is El Nino?
El Nino is basically a phenomenon where you have very warm temperatures off the western coast of South America, and because of that situation going on, you have very heavy rainfall in that particular region, and because of the storms associated with El Nino over that part, it tends to disrupt the entire weather pattern across the world. And what happens here is that we do tend to get less rainfall across the Eastern Caribbean, especially during the dry season and the wet season also. But as I said before, it all depends on the other the dynamics that are going on in the Atlantic and elsewhere in the world.
Okay, so you mentioned just now that we are, therefore, as a result of El Nino, experiencing less rainfall, correct?
Well, in the case of what happened last month, people may say there is El Nino, but what you have to understand is that we had a situation last month where we had 2 tropical cyclones in the Atlantic to our north. Usually, we would get tropical waves coming across from the west coast of Africa, and that would bring the much needed rain and showers. But due to the fact that we have tropical cyclones Lee and Margot to our north, we were denied of those rain showers even the feeder bands from those systems did not even reach Barbados, so we were left high and dry, and that has been the case. And in addition, those systems move very, very slow, and because they were to our north, we had very heated conditions almost for the entire month.
Sorry, we had very
Heated conditions.
heated conditions indeed, and we still are experiencing that heat to the extent perhaps that we may be facing more drought-like conditions during this time. And I'm setting up a wicket for Mr. Agriculture, or wait, I shouldn't call you that because people might listen to the calling program and get mixed up. Mr. Paul. I'm setting up a wicket for Mr. Paul to talk to us after you as it relates to these dry, very heated conditions and how they affect the agricultural sector. So, Mr. Murray, okay, I'll hand over to you, Mr. Paul, and bring you into the discussion as it relates to this issue of climate and agriculture.
Good evening to everyone. Thank you very much, Crystal. And members of the head table, thank you. Well, it is obvious to many of you who may be farmers in the room, I think it's at least one, as to what the impact is likely to be, because one of the things for livestock, we almost remember that animals are like living beings, and we demand very comfortable conditions in order to, to be our best, think properly, work properly, everything else. Even sleeping is a function of, being in comfortable conditions. And of course, the same thing applies to animals. Like we don't understand sometimes that you might have situations where when you make animals uncomfortable, they don't perform well, they don't grow as well, they're irritable, they don't eat as much. All of these things, and of course, sometimes the best example I could think of is a poultry pen, where you have a situation, if you have, say, 100 birds in a pen in a small area, imagine that if you had this room filled with people. At first, if you have 1, 2, it's not too bad, 3, 4, 5, that's too bad. Then you start to have 100, it starts getting comfortable without a fan, the same way that they feel. And then we expect still the animals to perform in conditions like that. So, of course, climate is very important, and your immediate climate, your surroundings. But one of the things that in Barbados that we don't discuss a lot is the whole question of microclimates. You'll be surprised that you will have conversations with people, with farmers, and they will tell you that if you go to, say, St. Andrew or St. Joseph, that it is a relatively dissimilar climate to what you experience in St. Michael, and then, of course, that impacts on the type of crops or the type of agriculture that you have in those particular areas. So the thing is that we cannot operate under any illusion, yes, that climate is extremely important, microclimate is extremely important in terms of agriculture and the type of crops that you can grow in any particular area, and that of course cannot be underestimated. In discussion of climate, I noticed that sometimes we as a country subscribe to what do you call the goal, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and somehow we don't seem to have any discussion on them, and the extent to which we as a country are actually trying to fulfill those goals, and the extent to which that because we are not actually fulfilling those goals is actually having an impact, especially on agriculture. For instance, one of the things that you might not be aware is that there are some crops, like last month, especially when it started to get hot, farmers actually lost crops as a result of it. They just couldn't do any better. So, but it also has to do with the extent to which we are actually working on the SDGs as a country, and whether or not we are actually fulfilling those. But I don't want to go too much on that because I don't have other speakers. But certainly, I would like to think that we should be addressing that as a topic, and the extent to which our fulfillment of those goals actually is impacting on our on climate and by extension our agriculture, because we are talking about sustainable development goals. How do we produce future climates that do not compromise the ability of human beings to survive and to make a living? And that includes, of course, agriculture, being able to have agriculture. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's just my opening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will move on to Dr. Connell to bring you into the discussion. There are correlations between the type of weather we are experiencing and the type of vector-borne diseases that we might have at this time of the year. And this certainly does play a role in the way how we manage with our agricultural sector as well. But could you give us some details in terms of this correlation?
So thank you, Madam Moderator, and good evening to the online audience as well as, of course, the live audience. We always forget the live audience here with us. So it's a pleasure to be here, and as I drove here to this session to get here on time, I thought, the fact that health is on a panel discussion is interesting, because where do I fit in, right? I mean, this is health, and all the rest of you are speaking about climate and agriculture. But health is very relevant, because although we are the most arrogant of the animal species, we're not much different from the same animals you just described. We are one with our environment. Let me just prove an incident case to you. Everything that you've done today has been influenced by the climate you've been exposed to. Start from this morning. So like me, you probably decided to conserve some energy and turning off your AC. So the room got hotter at an earlier time, so you felt uncomfortable, so you got up. Some of you who were not in air conditioning probably had your fan on last night, so you were a bit more dehydrated than you normally would have been, right? The choices that you took, you probably didn't go for a 10 o'clock run this morning because it was too hot. You probably didn't go for a 5 o'clock run either because you were still sleeping. But it changed your physical activity. What about your consumption? You probably had a lot more water, hopefully, than you normally would have. Some of you who went to church this morning decided that you weren't going to drink as much water because you didn't want to be distracted during the service. So you probably went into the service slightly more dehydrated. But that's just easy to think about. But think about the broader scale. The options that you have on Saturdays when you go to the market are significantly different. The foods that you buy in the supermarket are different because of the availability, and you probably are trying to conserve money, as all of us should be. And you're trying to get those products that are cheaper, and that depends on the climate around us. I think more and more in health, we have sat back, or maybe sat forward, and have recognized we are more than just a bystander in this whole environment. And so the term One Health, which actually came up in the 1950s, believe it or not, has been now catapulted to the forefront. One Health looks at three major domains. The human organism, which I said from the beginning, we tend to be arrogant, although we're probably the main people causing the climate change. The animals who we are part of the agriculture, we need them to eat and to survive, except some vegetarians, right? And of course the environment. These three need to be working together in unison and in unity, and distortions of any of them can have serious impacts. Now, Madam Moderator, you mentioned the vector-borne diseases, right? And we are accustomed living in the tropics to mosquito-borne diseases. Every year we experience a dengue season. Occasionally, some years we experience other vector-borne diseases like chikungunya and other conditions, which none of us like to get. And the Ministry of Health and Wellness takes steps to help to get us to reduce the risk of mosquito-borne illnesses. But just think about this. Climate changes are causing shifts in mosquitoes or vectors around the world. So we are now at risk of mosquito-borne illnesses for a longer period of time. Where do people go when they get really sick? you don't have to respond and say the emergency room. I know that may not be the most favorable place, but they go to a healthcare facility, right? Healthcare facilities then need to be climate resilient. How are you going to feel sitting in the emergency room for 10 hours that's not air conditioned? I know that was an underestimate, right? Or what about machines that are used to treat patients that are climate sensitive? Blood pressure devices in my own clinic, for instance, BAM did an outdoor drive. We wanted to check blood pressure and blood sugar, and the machine stopped working because we're outdoors. So we don't really think about the impact climate has on health, or sometimes we just think on things like mosquito-borne diseases. But I am going to close by making the argument, everything we do from this morning and moving forward is all governed by climate that we are exposed to. So we really are not only what we eat, but where we live.
Have you seen any trends in terms of shifts in human health with respect to the heat? And what have been some of the major challenges that persons have been presenting with?
Right. Well, that's an easy question, because one easy response is vector-borne diseases are more prevalent, right? Such as mosquito-borne diseases like dengue. The NCDs are also not immune to this, although I wish they were. They are affected by it. So high blood pressure and diabetes are also affected because, like many people out there, you think, well, how is that really going to affect me if it's hotter outside, right? It does. It changes your physiology. It changes the way certain systems in your body works. It changes the impact, the medications that we prescribe. They're not meant to be prescribed when you're outside dehydrated in the heat. That's not the assumption made. And so changes have to be made to the treatment. If you want to be really extreme to say how climate has changed, and this is going to be controversial, our entire way of health and maybe illness, let's think about a pandemic, which we still don't know the origin, but perhaps this pandemic and many other zoonotic conditions where viruses have crossed animal species and have kind of moved over into humans are largely triggered by changes in climate. So these are things that we need to be careful moving forward. So yes, we always think about the infectious diseases because we link them closer to the environment. But patients living with hypertension, diabetes, and cancers, are influenced by extreme conditions as well. How many people in the room knew that air quality is a direct determinant for stroke and heart attack? Because we only think about air quality involving the lungs, and if its side is smoky, then it's only going to put me at risk of an asthma attack. But in New York, we saw as the smoke came across from Canada, the prevalence of strokes went up because air pollution causes vascular responses, and that puts many people at risk of vascular events like heart attacks and strokes. So it's not something that we should ignore.
This definitely puts the Barbados Meteorological Services under pressure to make sure that the notices that are issued, the alerts, are not only timely, but certainly accurate. But my understanding is that you've gone a little further than that with the alert system transition that you've recently made. Cherise, can you tell us about that?
Open it closer. You're assuming that I'm strong.
Chivalry is alive here at St. George Secondary School, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So I took so long to get the microphone off this time that I actually forgot your question.
The Barbados Meteorological Services, recognizing all that we've heard about the importance of climate and the impacts of it, you have been more astute or detailed in the alerts you've put out. Give us some more details on that transition from just partly cloudy with a few scattered showers to what you're doing now, which I understand is way more beneficial and useful to the public.
I think you're talking more about the weather forecasts. And a previous panel discussion would have talked in depth about that. We also issue seasonal forecasts. So we talk about what the potential weather conditions could be.
One second, I don't want you to gloss over the impact-based forecasting model, please. Because some of us, even though we've been talking about it, us as the panel, we might be tired talking about it, but there are some people here who may not be aware of what it is all about. So can you go into some detail?
Panelists.
Like it's a color-coded graphic. So green is no action. Yellow is be aware. Orange, which we typically associate with watches or advisories. That is be prepared. And red is take action. That's usually associated with our warnings.
So folks, when you see, especially on social media, the Barbados Meteorological Services notices about the weather conditions on a daily basis, there is a color code being utilized. And as you would have heard just now, it goes from green to yellow, orange to red. And there are also additional tips in terms of how you should navigate your day based on the color code, so that it is more than just telling you that there's going to be bad weather, but they explain it so that you're aware whether you're going to be prone to more flooding during that day or higher temperatures and so on. And if you have not begun as yet to follow the Barbados Meteorological Services on social media or the Department of Emergency Management, we want to ask you to take the time out to do that so that you are aware well in advance of the changes in the conditions. You were expounding on a seasonal model that you use as well?
Yes, please. We issue seasonal forecasts for rainfall, temperature, and drought.
You want to tell us more about those seasonal alerts?
Okay, so the seasonal forecasts are usually for a 6-month period. We break the forecast down into monthly sections. We found that has been a little more useful for especially people in the agriculture sector to break down the forecast month by month, and it's usually for the next 6 months. We issue these forecasts once monthly. Actually, the next forecast will come out in the next day or two, and the forecast is published in our Barbados Climate Outlook newsletter.
And this newsletter is available where?
You can find the newsletter on our website, www.barbadosweather.org. It's in the climate section tab.
I just Googled it.
So folks, you can go on the BMS website as well to access this forecast newsletter. Can you give us the URL for your website? Your website URL.
www.barbadosweather.org.
Barbadosweather.org. That's where you can access the Beacon newsletter,
Yes, please.
Barbados Climate Outlook newsletter. All right. So we've touched so far on a number of very interesting elements of our topic as it relates to the impact of the climate on human health and on the agricultural sector. I want to re-engage Mr. Paul on this matter of produce and scarcity, and how these perhaps higher than normal weather temperatures have been affecting the availability of certain produce on the market in recent times.
First of all, let me just say that the commodities are impacted, have always been impacted. I mean, I could think, growing up in Barbados, you know that, for instance, as I think the doctor was saying, weather patterns, it's not strange, and that is it's cyclical. Yeah. Where you find, at one point in time in Barbados, you used to have a lot of tomatoes, if you all can remember. And then as the rainy season kicked in, just things went south. But it has to do with those cyclical patterns. And for instance, now today, this year has been difficult for some crops, depending on where you are. And again, you know, we talk about the whole question of the I really want to go back to these development goals that we talk about, climate action and synergies, and especially for smaller and developing states, that sometimes we do not appreciate that when we make significant changes in particular locales, it has an impact on your microclimate in that particular area. And that is something we don't seem to appreciate in Barbados. For instance, you take a crop such as sweet potatoes, temperature could have an impact on it. You take even, certain things such as the crops that demand a lot of water. You take a simple crop as lettuce. Climate does have an impact in terms of the temperature. So it has to do with creating an environment in which, whether or not you're producing livestock or animals, that it can have. So for instance, this year, I don't think we were I can remember 3-4 years ago, we did very well when it comes to, say, sweet potatoes. They were coming through your nose and everything else like that, going very well. But this year, we've had some challenges in terms of maintaining consistent production of sweet potatoes. Yams is another one, for instance. But of course, yams is a crop that, you can only grow at a particular time of the year, that you should put in it in now. Hopefully, you get a good crop. But it's a cyclical in many cases, and the thing is really that the weather plays a very important part on your ability to be able to harvest. We talk a lot about our onion crops. What we have seen, for instance, that because of the changes in the climate, it has impacted on the plant varieties or the seed varieties that you're able to use. So you've had to look for other seed varieties that you would not normally have to in order to make sure that you can get a better performance from them. Curiosity, we like to talk, or we have this level of fear of, what you call these greenhouses in Barbados and stuff like that. But even those greenhouses, by the way, climate can impact. Because, for instance, one of the things that we don't appreciate, I keep on saying, in the northern world, where you have a summer, you have spring, summer, autumn, winter, that's right? So you have a period of extreme cold in those northern climates, and you have a period of extreme heat. The good thing about those northern climates is that when you have a period of extremely cold, what happens? A lot of the pests get killed off, they don't survive. So you have, in other words, your pest load is extremely low. When you come out of winter, you know your pest load low because in fact a lot of the pests would have gotten killed and everything else like that. So in that area is a reduced amount. It is nothing like that in these places. We have the perfect place in the tropics to make everybody do well, including the pests, okay? So they're around for the whole year. They ain't going nowhere, right? And the thing is that we don't seem to recognize when it comes to greenhouses, once those pests get inside those greenhouses, you cannot get them out. You could do everything possible. Whatever it is, you don't seem to be able to get them out. There was one chap, I think he was doing extremely well for a few years. And then, I don't want to mention his name, but he made a mistake he had stopped growing, and he was producing his own planting material. What did he do? He stopped growing for a little while, and then he said, well, you know what I could do? I need to get back some planting material. So let me get some planting material for somebody else, from somewhere from off of my locality. What did he do? It messed up his greenhouses. And up to now, he has difficulty bringing that greenhouse now back on stream. So greenhouses are not the panacea that we think it is, especially for the tropics. It may help in certain areas, but certainly it does not help in all areas. And the essential thing that we need to recognize is that, yes, it would affect your ability to produce certain crops. So when you see that sweet potatoes are not coming on as well as they should, because just simple as that, they're just not doing well under certain conditions. You take, for instance, also to a simpler crop as cucumbers. We forget that everything has to blossom. It comes from a flower, okay? And if the conditions, for instance, extremely dry conditions, imposes a lot of stress on the plants. We don't see it. It's like a living human being. You can imagine if it started to go up, drink more water, it started to get hot. That's how the plant is. So it needs that type of conditions in order to survive. And it is a natural process. Sometimes there's not much you can do about it, but you have to respect the fact that, yes, as a result of that, there will be challenges given to farmers in some localities that, look, some things will not be able to grow as well as if it was in other localities. And in fact, there are some places, we are trying to grow broccoli here in Barbados. I don't know if you all see it. There's a lady I know in St. George. She grows broccoli at a particular time of the year, and she does a pretty good job. But in that particular area, it is unique in terms of the climate that she's experiencing, right? It's like a valley, it is cool, everything is just right. But I don't know how she's doing well with these high temperatures, because that in itself might be a challenge. But the point I'm making is that we can expect that there will be challenges when it comes to certain products. So there will be, you find, for instance, you take the sweet potato prices having kind of high this year. But that's part of it. You just have to pay a little more.
I'm glad you touched on that, because I paid $8.89 for 2 half-dead looking sweet potatoes yesterday. I was so traumatized. I asked the lady to weigh them again. I could not believe it. But certainly, I mean, I'm glad you raised the topic of the lady in the valley and growing her own broccoli and so on. Mm-hmm. Many of us here and those who are listening are very keen, especially because of these prices, to be able to grow our own products. You've told us, perhaps more so hypothetically, that there are certain things that you can't grow. But let's say, for example, I had the inkling at the end of this month when I got paid to put aside a little money to start a little kitchen garden. What would be ideal to grow at this time in these temperatures for somebody who's looking to ease the squeeze?
I can't tell you that. I need to go where you are. No, seriously though, because sometimes...
I am in a normal suburban area.
What's a normal suburban? You'll be amazed that in Barbados, microsystems...
Okay, so let's use, for example, across the road from here, Constant, because we might have 1 or 2 neighbors here. Mm-hmm. If I was living over on the other side of the road from where we are in Constant, and I wanted to start a kitchen garden, what would you recommend that I start to grow?
Yeah, like lettuce,
Lettuce?
I like green vegetables. I mean, that's nice. If you get to grow it, it's good.
So green vegetables.
It also depends on your soil type, of course.
Pardon?
Your soil.
The soil.
And as a matter of fact, that was another issue that was raised recently, because we always seem to think about climate in the upper part, right? But also, what scientists are also discovering is that soil temperatures on a whole are actually increasing. Right? So that, for instance, what you will find is that sometimes soil temperatures have to be at a certain level in order for plants to be able to grow properly and even to retain moisture. And sometimes, because of this extreme heat, you're losing moisture even more rapidly than you're accustomed to losing them at the same time. So even a crop that you might say, think I could comfortably grow in that particular area, it will be challenged.
So what about technology and the ways within which we can use...
Well, there's also the thing about cost. This is the thing. Everything is like a chain effect. So you might say, okay, let's use technology, and for instance, all it will do is that when it recognizes these tensiometers that they have in the soil, when they recognize that the soil moisture starts to drop below a certain level, it applies more water. But of course, your bill goes up. So you're going to have to pay $8 a pound for the tomatoes, for the sweet potatoes. There are consequences. If you are, and the yields might actually be lower. You take, for instance, the issue of milk recently, where we talked about the fact that, it can impact on your milk production, because if you have these high temperatures, the ability then to breed the heifers or the cows, as the case may be, is compromised, because, animals only want to breed under certain conditions, if you get where I'm coming from. So the thing is really that it is more difficult for animals to come back into heat. All of those things, and sometimes when it does come back into heat, sometimes it doesn't work. All of these things, the whole physiology of the animal is actually impacted as a result of these conditions. So that is why climate is extremely important. So I think you're going to pay a little bit, pay the $8.
I paid the $8 grudgingly, but I paid it.
Okay.
Mr. Murray, there are different kinds of drought, I am made to understand. There's agricultural drought, there's hydrological drought. Can you educate us on these differences? Okay,
so as you have mentioned before, drought comes in many forms and sizes. So to the layman, a drought is basically a prolonged period of abnormally low rainfall, which got stretched for like over 3 or 4 months. So in other words, like, say like during dry season, if you're accustomed getting 40 millimeters in February, 50 in March, and 60 in April, and only get 40 millimeters for those 3 periods, then that would be considered a drought in a sense, right? And then you branch off into the agricultural drought, which basically occurs many days if sufficient water for certain crops and livestock. Because, you know, if you got cows, you know, and you got sheep, you know, they need a certain amount of water, you know, to be alive and all that. Crops like lettuce, you know, you need to give them a lot of water in order to keep them growing. If they don't get enough water, then they will obviously wither and they will die. But the most serious one is the hydrological drought, which is basically a drought where there's insufficient water in the agricultural section now and also in the aquifers, and that is the most serious one that needs consideration. And that results in water rationing, which we do not like. Basically, you know, the water will be forced to turn off the water during the day or during nighttime so as to give time for the aquifers to replenish. Because you must appreciate is that if you get rainfall, it doesn't immediately go down to the aquifers. Immediately, it has to go through the limestone and the clay soil and all that. It seeps through very slowly before it reaches the aquifers.
And this is why we would have recently had a prohibition issued by the Barbados Water Authority.
Yes.
And certainly we would want to echo their call for residents, citizens to be more cautious in the way how we utilize water as a result of these very arid conditions that we're facing.
And that was due to the fact that we had a very dry period last year, so obviously the aquifers were a bit on the low side, and that was what caused the rationing to be enforced.
Indeed. Looking at the trends in recent times, what would you say are some of the major observations that the Barbados Meteorological Services have made with respect to these changes in our climate?
Well, I will focus on the temperatures because rainfall, you know, you will have the variation due to the El Nino and La Nina effect, right? But for the temperatures, what we've noticed is that there has been a very slight increase in the maximum temperatures and the minimum temperatures. So what I'm seeing is that, say, like, if you're accustomed hearing 24.5 degrees during night in May, it probably has now gone up to 25.0 or 25.2. So there's a very slight, steady increase in the minimum temperatures during night and also the maximum temperatures during the day.
So are you saying the nights are getting colder and the days are getting hotter?
Now, what I'm saying is that the nights are getting hotter very, very slowly.
The
over
nights are
years.
getting hotter gradually.
Over years.
So we are not necessarily experiencing much deviation in terms of the highs and the lows, but what the lows are in and of themselves, where they start, they're moving up and becoming higher.
I think it is more pronounced with the minimum temperatures because, you know, we are accustomed to the hot temperatures during the day, but in terms of the minimum temperature during night, it is becoming a little more pronounced as the years go on. And that's based on my research that I've done.
And this is because I didn't buy an electric car.
The funny thing is, if you buy an electric car, you know, obviously you have to get energy from somewhere. The energy still has to come from a diesel-powered electric plant or from millions and millions of windmills that are across the country or solar panels. And the question that I got to ask now is, does the grid at present, would they have the capacity to provide that power for electric cars if you have to go to electric by the year 2030 or 2035?
And the grid is powered by gas
And diesel right now.
and diesel.
And part of it will also be powered by the solar panels, but the question you got to ask is it enough? It will not be enough. You're going to have the whole entire island flooded with solar panels or have islands offshore dedicated for solar panels and wind farms in order to provide the energy that we need. If we have to make that change over from diesel and natural gas to purely electric.
Very, very interesting observation. So it's almost as though we're shifting the pressure from one hand to the next, based on what you're saying.
There's no problem with that.
Unless we can, as you said, flood the island with solar panels, and if the grid can handle it, basically.
You really want to do that?
I know you guys are burning with questions, but we ask you to please hold them until we get to the end. In terms of what we are seeing in terms of these trends, this is for you again, Mr. Murray. The sectors that are impacted by these changes, what would you say are the more vulnerable sectors in our country right now as it relates to these climate changes?
At the present moment, in terms of agriculture, they are vulnerable because obviously if we are experiencing climate change and the temperatures are too high for certain crops, obviously it is going to have a ripple effect in terms of the availability of certain crops and prices, because the consumer does not like high prices and they be forced to look elsewhere for cheaper alternatives, which may not be adequate. In other words, in other words, it comes to a point where we are forced to bring in imported stuff which may not be of a suitable quality for the average consumer. And as far as the agricultural sector is concerned, they are going to have some implications in that sector in terms of higher prices and lower availability. And due to the fact that we are being told time and time again to try to eat healthier foods, but at the same time, we are faced with a dilemma where we have to choose between spending more money on healthy foods than to turn around and save money and eating junk foods in order to save some cash from time to time.
What is the strategy that the BMS has in mind to build more bridges with sectors like agriculture?
What needs to be done is that we gotta have more dialogue among the key players in the agricultural sector. We have to find out exactly what they need from us, what we can provide, and in terms of data sharing, what we can do in order that we can prepare more products for the agricultural sector so that they can tell the farmers, well, you have a heat forecast for such a period. And then the farmers, not the best, the farmers will know what crops will survive under higher temperatures than those that do not. So there has to be an exchange of information between the BMS and the key sectors so that we can produce much better products in the future. That is my take on it.
Agreed. Certainly, dialogue is one of the pillars upon which we host these sessions with you, the public. And we just want to reiterate for those of you who are just joining, we are discussing the influence of climate on agriculture and human health, brought to you by the Barbados Meteorological Services and the Department for Emergency Management, with support from the Public Affairs Department. Dr. Connell, we want to bring you back into the discussion once more to talk about the haze. I believe that there's been more of it in recent times, and certainly we have been advising the public how to navigate haze when it does spike in our atmosphere. What are the main symptoms that persons normally experience when we have these higher levels of haze, and what are some of the recommendations for them to be able to manage their health condition?
Okay, so I'm always very interested when I hear a response from the Barbados Meteorological Service, because I listened carefully to your question. You asked what are the sectors that are going to be affected by all this climate change? And immediately you think of agriculture. But one major sector that's going to be affected by climate change is health. Of course. And agriculture can't really progress without the human organism to drive it. So think about being, this is just to use an example, in a hospital ward that is not air conditioned, with higher temperatures. Is that even feasible? What about medication that's stored on the shelf that is not usually refrigerated? Will that be feasible moving forward? Some of the equipment in hospitals, will they work at these higher temperatures? So it has significant risk on us. And this is not even putting into perspective the fact that heat-related illnesses will present more and will be more severe coming into the health space, as well as respiratory illnesses. So whenever we think about climate, we always like to think about agriculture, and I'm a food fanatic as well, so I like that. But we need humans to drive agriculture, and we are also very much at risk. Now, in terms of haze, everyone thinks about haze affecting the lungs because it's natural. I mean, you breathe in stuff, your lungs are the first organs exposed to it. And that's not a bad concept. So patients living with respiratory diseases such as COPD and asthma and all these other conditions are prone to attacks because of that. It sets up a whole set of inflammation in your lungs, and that causes your lungs, the tubes, to kind of squeeze in. That causes you to wheeze, and you get an asthma attack. Even if you are not an asthmatic, many of us have realized this, that if you have a bad flu or a bad respiratory infection, outside is a bit dusty, you may start to wheeze, and even your doctor may prescribe an inhaler just for that temporary period. So there are ways of preventing that. One, stay away from those areas that are dusty. It's hard to kind of separate yourself from haze. Another thing that we've become accustomed to, which might be around for a lot longer for another reason, are these things called masks, which actually do trap small particles, especially the N95 mask and the KN94 mask. They don't stop all of them from coming through, but certainly they will trap some of the finer particles so they don't get dumped into your lungs. So lung health is important for breathing, but lung health also sets off this whole cascade of inflammation that your lungs are connected to the rest of your body. And so we in this region genetically are possibly a bit more pro-inflammatory. In other words, all those conditions that are associated with inflammation, we tend to get more of. So rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, diabetes. So these things are driven by inflammation. And even my own specialty of hypertension is largely driven by inflammation. If you are constantly consuming inflammatory particles, then there's more inflammation, right? So you're actually increasing your risk. Now, think about it. The medical fraternity is telling you eat healthy, exercise more. It's not saying to you, we're not saying to you, make sure your environment is not inflammatory. I mean, what does that mean, right? But so the point I'm making is that we really are where we live. If you live in an environment where you're next to a whole collection of water that mosquitoes are breathing, you're more likely to get mosquito-borne diseases. If you're next to someone that's constantly burning smoke every single day, you're more likely to have a respiratory disease, and you're more likely to have a cardiovascular event as well because the air quality is not there. Some of these small particles are called P25, and I hope the climatologists listening don't correct me. I think they are P25. They're extremely small particles. They get absorbed. They don't only get absorbed into your lungs, they get into your blood, they go to all the other organs. They set this cascade of inflammation, and lo and behold, you have a stroke. Now, if you're outside and the dust warning is high in your area, people don't really relate having a stroke to being in a dusty environment. You relate an asthma attack, but not having a stroke. So think about it. With a high NCD burden in our region, you throw on top of that the fact that climate is changing not in our favor, more inflammation, a health system that is possibly not the most resilient, even at the best of times. This is a whole recipe for, a public health emergency.
The advocates associated with the national nutrition policy would perhaps be upset with me if I skated so close to the edge and didn't jump off and talk about the fact that in this heat, persons may very well be quenching their thirst with things that are not necessarily ideal, like these sodas and these sweet
Right.
drinks and so on. So perhaps you would want to join me in advocating on their behalf with respect to this notion of navigating the heat and health.
Yeah, I saw that one coming. So but again, let's be honest. If you're going to the supermarket and you have to pay more for a bottle of water than a sugar-sweetened beverage, then cost comes into it. And I'm always want to advocate drinking tap water, because in most people and in most places it's safe and palatable, and therefore we should try to drink a lot more tap water. But you're absolutely right. So first of all, we don't drink as much water as we should because we think that we're in a hot climate. Our bodies are kind of accustomed to this. Why top up, right? So a lot of us every single day, including Sundays, is that an ad for someone? Carlton, right? We are dehydrated. And you go to the bathroom, you pass urine, it's yellow, you think this is the way urine is supposed to look. It's not the way your urine is supposed to look. Your urine is meant to be clear. If your urine is yellow, you're already dehydrated. But you become so accustomed to seeing that you think, well, nothing is wrong. So we're also not using enough cooling breaks. There's some people who don't really pay attention to being in the sun, because again, we've been in the sun for all our lives. We don't really pay attention to UV indices and those kind of things. How many people in this room apply sunblock? So my second question is going to be how many people reapply it, but you've answered my first. So we don't even use sunblock. These are practical things when I'm going to work, and I know I'm going to be kind of crossing over a lot on campus. I wear sunblock because I know I'm going to be outside a lot more. These are not things you normally would think about living in a country like Barbados, and tourists might look at me and say, are you crazy? Why are you wearing sunblock? But you're putting yourself at an increased risk. Now, taking in the extra calories is something, because all this water is bad for me. There are very few cases where you can actually consume too much water. Your kidneys are pretty good at getting rid of the excess water. They're pretty good at telling you when you're dehydrated as well. So drink water freely. Those people who are at risk of developing problems with consuming too much water, I think people who have things like heart failure and also kidney disease on dialysis, then you need to negotiate the amount of water with your doctor. But even in these groups of people, they require more water in the hotter season because they're losing water in their respiration, in their breathing. They're losing water from sweat. If you have diabetes, then your sweating mechanism is not really what it should be. And at some points today, you're probably sweating more than you should, so you're losing a lot of water and when you don't really need to, and that's at night. So many patients living with uncontrolled diabetes, they sweat a lot at night and lose a lot of water and get up on mornings dehydrated, because how many of us are getting up at night and rehydrating? We don't do that, right? Mm. There you go. Or you're sleeping under a fan, so the fan is actually dehydrating you as well. So these are serious considerations for all of us. And I will challenge you in the next 24 hours, think about all the things that you're going to do differently because of the weather, including how you're going to drink up at night. But think about the effect that weather is having on making the decisions that you're going to make. Whether it's you're not going to go into town today where you might get something cheaper because it's too hot. So you're going to go to a mall where it's air conditioned and pay more money for it. And I just want to finish by saying, I looked at the room when I first got here, and wearing a jacket, it was hot as well. And I recognized that a lot of you looked stressed because it was hot, right? As sunset occurred, more smiles came up because the climate around you changed. It was cooler. You didn't have to think about feeling happier. Imagine being stuck in traffic and there is a downpour and it's flooding and traffic is intense. The rain is flooding and you really didn't maybe get a forecast to say, well, this is going to happen tomorrow at this date. Because Bajans, we like to think that the weather can be exactly predicted, which it can't, right? I'm on your side. So you're stuck in traffic now, maybe going to collect kids, the rain is pouring, and imagine the anxiety that is having on you as a person. Now, think about with climate change, this anxiety becomes more frequent, and we're already leaving a pandemic where many of us have not returned to a state of mental health or mental wellness that we were before. This has real impacts on us as a society. So my takeaway point is the sector that is most challenged, there's clearly a bias here from climate change, is actually the health sector.
Please note, this is a panel and not a debate. But we are on your side too. I noticed you didn't mention the children, but I believe the same thing would go for the kids in terms of the increasing of water intake, especially when they have games and so on.
So I'm going to say this, that is probably not even correct. Children are at a much higher risk, So we shouldn't just see kids as small adults. Kids, the water loss that's possible in a child is a lot more because of the surface area compared to the volume. They're also a lot more physically active than we are. Remember your days at school? You used to run around a lot more. You don't run around at work. So they're prone to dehydration. Now, when you place them in a classroom where teachers are saying to them, you must only drink at water breaks. I mean, what is that? There's no breathing break. You breathe.
If I could just interject.
Yeah.
I believe at the beginning of this, no, I'm very sure, at the beginning of this school year, the Ministry of Education issued an edict, if I may call it that children ought to be allowed to drink water as necessary. So this notion of water breaks, unless you're talking about fixed water breaks,
right,
those are allowed, yes, but in addition to telling the teachers and the principals to allow children to drink at will, they have indicated that teachers and principals should facilitate additional water breaks. But no child should be told in class tomorrow, after we say it today, even more pointedly than the ministry said it, that they can't drink water. No, we have to wait till break. Because that's a recipe for the child passing out. And forgive me for asking this pedestrian question. You kind of hinted at all of we dehydrated, but what are the signs other than the urine and the color of dehydration? Are headaches one of the signs?
So I'm glad you stated that in the classroom, because immediately after the ministry responded saying that, water is freely available, a parent wrote and said, well, I actually had to write a letter to get a pass for my daughter to go to get water from the cafeteria. So teachers need to be clever, and I teach as well, so the teaching design and classroom control is important. However, we have to incorporate water into the usual environment of the classroom. We can't have a water break. It has to be water in the classroom. So your question about changes that occur with dehydration, I think I made a point on some program that the Orkidneys are actually pretty good at letting you know when you're dehydrated. That is true. Your brain also plays a role in that. If you're dehydrated, you feel thirsty. But the thing is, as you get older, you don't feel as thirsty as you should. Your brain also lags, so it tells you you're dehydrated when you're already very dehydrated. By the time my brain is telling me that I'm thirsty, I know I'm already dehydrated. So don't rely on your brain. Also, when you throw on the NCDs, your sensitivity to thirst is also lost. So imagine an old lady at home, sitting in a home, all the windows are closed because she's afraid someone might break in, and it's hot. And she's on medication for hypertension that's causing her to lose a lot of fluid. Her thirst isn't really there, so even with this dehydration, she isn't really drinking anything. Now, think about that. That's an extreme, but that happens every single day. And patients present to the emergency room almost comatose because of that. Alertness is another thing. So, cognitive tasks. The medical students who I teach tell me I get a bit more miserable when I'm dehydrated. I don't agree with them, but think about it. When you're at work, you can focus less if you're dehydrated. And this is where technology comes in. Set alarms that indicate to you at set times, it's time to drink water. Whether you feel thirsty or not, keep drinking. Set reminders if you go to the restroom and you recognize that your urine has changed color, it's time to top up those kind of things. So alertness is a very serious thing. Think about the dehydrated driver driving without AC in a hot car. That's a recipe for an accident. Your mental alertness just is not there. The other organ that plays an important role as a sign or symptom is your cardiovascular system. But by the time your heart and blood vessels are affected, it's possibly too late. You need to be heading then to the emergency room because your blood pressure falls suddenly, and of course you can lose consciousness.
Does your skin give you signs as well?
Besides sweating, your skin usually tries to, in extreme cases, now if you're very dehydrated, starts to conserve heat. Release heat without sweating. And so you can get your skin may actually get quite hot on the surface. Because we're, again, more accustomed to the ambient temperature, the skin changes for people living in this region are not as for people living in colder climates. You probably realize that as well. But your environment plays an important part on all the physiology I've mentioned. And to use this as an example, think about the last time you boarded an aircraft. The reason you passed a lot more urine is because you're in an air-conditioned cabin. The cabin temperature was also different. You probably consumed a lot more caffeine than you normally would to stay awake for the red-eye flight. So that also causes you to pass a lot more urine and maybe enhance dehydration. So my closing comment is still the same. We really are where we live. Our health is really where we live in the environment around us.
At the risk of a march outside afterwards for all the coffee lovers. Now this is a two-part question. Mm-hmm. Should we be how much more should we be drinking? I know when I was growing up, we used to hear 8 glasses of water a day. I don't think I ever get anywhere near that. I'm very guilty of not drinking my water.
Yeah.
But there are schools of thought that there are certain types of liquids that should not necessarily be counted as the equivalent of a glass of water, like coffee,
right,
because of the fact that you just mentioned you may end up passing it out more and your body's not absorbing it. Am I using the right medical terminology here?
Yeah, no, you are. So that's pretty good, actually. So I was at an event last night, and someone at the table said to me, "Oh, well, they're taking so long to bring the water around. I might as well just top up some champagne just to stay rehydrated." That's not a good idea because alcohol dehydrates you even more. So all this ice cold beer on Kadooment Day to stay hydrated, it's going to cause you to be even more dehydrated. Caffeine does stimulate your body to pass more urine. So although you're technically drinking more liquid, you're also peeing a lot more. So that's not a good thing to rehydrate as well. The best liquid is actually water. Some of the sports drinks are also pretty good. Now you got to kind of manage calories here because some of them have a lot of calories.
Please define sports drinks because I don't want people thinking that you're advocating for us to be drinking the wrong thing.
Well, I'm not even going to mention any brands. But for instance, some people who are working outside may lose not only water in their sweat, but they lose salt. This is not to say everyone is going to go out there and take some extra salt, especially those of you who have high blood pressure. But you do lose salt or sodium, and as a result, marathon runners, for instance, in extreme heat, they get something known as exercise-induced hyponatremia, which is low sodium. So when they're running marathons, they have to drink water and take salt tablets. Most of us are not running marathons every day. So for us, it's just really drinking water. If you are going to have a sports drink, be sensible about it. Don't use it as your only rehydration source. I said I wasn't going to mention any brands, but so there's a rehydrant that sounds like it's for kids, hint, hint, which is actually used for adults as well to rehydrate. And you can buy it in the supermarket. And it's formulated to be easily absorbed, quickly absorbed, so you get hydrated even faster than water. The one point I wanted to make about water before I close is that it really is not a sprint but a marathon throughout the day. You can't kind of get yourself really dehydrated and go in a room and guzzle down a liter of water and think this is going to do it. It has to be a constant process so your body has time to absorb it, and because the fluid shifts are also a challenge.
So we need to walk with those water bottles.
Yeah, and use technology. If you're like me, you don't really like to drink water inherently, or you think you're going to forget, set something on your watch that's going to remind you. For men, it's about 3.7 liters in a day, which is a lot of water. And for women, it's about 2.5. Now, if you are a woman and you're outside a lot more, maybe in agriculture, your limit is not going to be 2.5. But the one thing that's good, remember, you have paired organs that are pretty good indicators of when you're dehydrated. So check your urine to make sure that it's still clear.
Mr. Paul,
yes,
we're talking about human health and hydration, but the animals need good irrigation systems as well, don't they?
Of course. It's kind of painful sometimes when you go out in the countryside during the day and you see some animals out in the field and really hot. And sometimes there's not even a water bucket around you. In other words, there's no evidence that the animal has access to water, which is extremely bad because truthfully, all they're doing is jeopardizing the animal and the investment, I call it an investment, because seriously, you expect to get, you take a cattle, you expect at least after a year, some people carry for 2 years, so you get a good tidy sum for it, and all you do is compromising the growth of the animal in the process. So, people don't pay attention to it. In fact, one of the things that, talking about the whole question of the meteorological services, is that what some farmers have resorted to doing is you take around, say, I think the hottest parts of the day probably going around after 12, 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, that time. Some farmers, what they have resorted to do is to actually utilize what we call the sprinklers on the barns. And that actually helps to keep the roof of the barns cool. And for some of them, it makes a difference to get that water on the barn, because some of them don't have any of the modern tunnel ventilated houses where basically you can maintain an airflow through the barns constantly. So what they do is that they have these sprinklers on top of the barns. So they come on every half an hour or so just to keep the roof of the barns cool, and that helps at the same time. So it is things like these, but also interesting that you talked about the whole question of the services, and I think one of the things is that we have to find ways by which farmers can actually see them as being more relevant, because one of the issues is that many farmers don't see the services being offered as extremely relevant, and maybe it is the way in which it's actually marketed. Where, for instance, as I said, changes in temperatures have a great impact. And even understanding the way in which, what the rainfall patterns are, all of these things has an influence. Farmers can actually better prepare themselves if they had access to the information and was able to, get some, information beforehand as to what is happening. And I think that in itself is something that we really need to know, because in terms of the health of animals especially, the heat plays a major role. You take, a lot of people take pigs, all of us in Barbados like pork, proper pork. So we don't understand that pigs really, they have no sweat glands. Really, in truth and the fact that they pant, and even for, pigs actually do die from heat exhaustion. We've had instances where when we are transporting animals, we try to do them during the cooler parts of the evening, either early morning or late evening. Why? Because they can actually die from exposure to the heat like this. So you need that information for those animals, and access to water is important, because sometimes we don't understand that if they don't get that water, it doesn't help them at all. And for instance, I think there was one instance where, I think it was earlier this year, where a particular farmer lost, I think it was about 5,000 birds one time.
Yes.
And a lot of heat exhaustion and no water, right? We don't understand that it is important for the animals that they have access to water when they need it. Sheep, Barbados black-bellied sheep, people consider these animals a very sturdy and hardy animal, but they need water. A lot of people I see have them, they tie them in a pen for a whole day, look back and see whether or not there's adequate supply of water. And the thing is, now, with the technology that's available, there are ways of actually maintaining water throughout in the pen. Right, you just run the lines. We put in, it's like the same thing that we use to fill up our the toilet bowls. The same principle, but for sheep, still waters run deep, so they don't like water moving. They like nice still water, and and all of these things can be utilized at that point in time, in terms of trying to ensure that animals have access to water. And when it comes to the crops themselves, too, again, it is a particular challenge in Barbados. A lot of crop farmers up there, they're using more water than usual, largely because of the fact that that they have to do it. Yeah. But one of the things, though, if I could be permitted to just say something on something else, which I think that we need also to recognize, is that sometimes, going back to the same sustainable development goals that we were talking about just now. one of the things is, I think it was, is goal number 50, talks about maintaining the environment above land. And sometimes it says that we must protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage our forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. We are not doing a good job in Barbados as far as that is concerned. And the issue that I don't think we are understanding is that because we are seeing developments happening in places in Barbados that we are not accustomed to see happening, it is actually affecting the microclimates in the area that are there. And it is actually posing challenges for agriculturalists too at the same time. You know, for instance, you are seeing flooding happening in areas that you're not accustomed. Temperatures are in certain areas are happening that is not accustomed. Why? Because of the fact that we are doing things on the surface that is actually impacting the microclimate in the area. And that is something I think that we as Barbadians, ordinary Barbadians, have to take a greater responsibility for. I've constantly spoken to the fact, even you mentioned the point about flooding. The flooding comes about as a result of the fact that you are not giving the earth enough time to absorb water, right? You know, I recall when I was a boy, when I had the floods in Queen's Park, I had to say that, you know, if you ever get rain like that, I don't know what's going to happen to Barbados. Because the rain fell, I think it was about 2 or 3 days. This thing fell, it was 2 days, right? Just fell from morning to evening, no stopping, no stopping. Can you imagine rain like that in Barbados? You know, it's really bad. And what I'm saying is that because of the way in which we are constructing our houses, right, we have a situation in Barbados where everybody wants concrete around the house. You don't want to put, in other words, instead of the paving stones, no, you laugh at it, but it's going to be a death trap, right? Because we don't understand that if we don't do like what they do in Canada, you know, in some places in Canada, you are mandated to maintain a certain amount of green around your house. This foolishness that we have, that we must go and put concrete all around your house. So what happens? You throw the water out on somebody, and that's where you get into flooding. And I really think that, seriously, we expect to have a good agricultural sector, people, you know, producing stuff, when ordinary householders in this country are being allowed to do things which are actually negatively impacting us as agriculturalists. They are, right? We're permitting people to come and put things around us that actually are compromising us. And I think really something needs to be done about that. Seriously.
Yes, we had an entire session dedicated to flooding, and that was one of the issues that was raised, and we echo your sentiments as it relates to this modern approach to our home construction, the dwellings, and the extent to which we perhaps need to now pivot to ensure that we are capturing the water. If we're not going to allow it to be absorbed on our premises because of all of the cement we've put down, we should at least have some system in place, and maybe this is a policy that needs to be issued, where persons who take that approach, some of you may be in here, you pour concrete around your whole house and let the water run off and be a problem to somebody else, which then, as Mr. Paul says, does have an impact on the extent of flooding in your area. It may be necessary for you to be responsible, I'm just throwing that out there, beat me after if you want, for catching some of that water and maybe using it around your house. Wash your car, you know, well, you don't have any plants to wet, but you might be able to still use it for some other non-potable purpose and help to manage the atmosphere or the propensity for your area to flood. Mr. Paul, you have been at the Barbados Agricultural Society for a number of years. In terms of climate and the advocacy that is being expected of you by your members, what are some of the main things, perhaps beyond the heat, that your members have been advocating for with respect to climate? I know there was a lot to be said about the water rates and so on to help to manage that, and certainly that's even more critical now with this weather. But are there other factors perhaps that are climate related that your membership have been asking you to advocate for on their behalf?
Well, certainly, you know, the things that we've had to adjust in terms, for instance, in genetics, we are trying to work through the genetics in terms of trying to utilize genetics that are more amenable to tropical conditions, right? And then sometimes it takes time to adjust. It's like, for instance, people don't understand that animals, they retain, the genetics are dictated by the environment. Because very often we seem to think that, the little experiment that we're doing, where you feel you could transfer animals somewhere else and retain those genetic properties, it's not as simple as that, right? Because they do have, the environment always imparts certain things to the animals. So one of the things that a lot of, that the farmers do look at is in terms of whether or not we're having the appropriate genetics when it comes to animal livestock. And similarly with plants, it's more important for the plants, because certainly the seed varieties that we are using now today, we are using the most appropriate seed varieties. And this is where, for instance, the level of research that actually is going into those, in having those appropriate seed varieties. I don't think that people recognize or understand that, Barbados was at one time a leader in cane breeding research, a leader. A lot of people, when they sit down and watch us as a nation, and we seem to think that somehow we cannot do as much as we think we thought. And we hear people talk about punching above weight, but we only punching above weight when it comes to putting on these skirts and all kind of stuff and singing for people and being entertainers. But we were actually leading researchers when it comes to the whole question of cane breeding. And in that respect, that is where I think maybe that we need a lot more, because we can actually go back there and recognize that because of where we are in terms of the tropics and things like that, and because of the changing climate that is happening right now, because we do need to understand what is happening in the climate, and we cannot just rely on people in the first world or so-called first world, to tell us what to do. We are actually here, and we do have the capability to actually do the type of research that is required to look at the appropriate type of genetic material that we need to use in order to ensure that we get the best. In other words, in terms of sweet potato cultivation, you even look at, for instance, onions. I mean, we do very well onions, but are we using the most appropriate varieties, All of these things that we are not actually taking on them. And unfortunately, our universities seem to also be impacted by what happens overseas, rather than trying to think maybe, and we do have students who are capable of doing the necessary research right here at home, in the same way that we did it 30 years ago when we had the cane breeding station right here, and we were leaders in terms of developing new cane varieties right here, and we actually sold those new cane breeding varieties to people and made money off of it. So in the same way that we did that, then it seems to we don't seem to recognize that we don't have to be entertaining everybody all the time. People, all of us can't sing. We are real lucky. That is, But the point I'm saying is that we are not doing the necessary level of investment in those areas of research when it comes to climate, even here locally, to understand, first of all, what is happening in terms of our climate, and secondly, how can we help to look at our current seed varieties to see whether or not we can develop more appropriate seed varieties. I know the Ministry of Agriculture will be talking about developing a seed bank and things such as these, but we need to stop the talk and do more, right? And maybe the what do you call it? The thing at Jukes, whatever it says, it's supposed to help and assist us in terms of getting there. But certainly, what we are looking at is that we need to look at those new seed varieties that can help us in terms of producing seed varieties that can actually give you all year-round sweet potato production, even yams. How can we do it? I mean, it's a big challenge when it comes to yams, but they will tell you. But the point is really, it is not something that is inconceivable that if we were to put our minds and hearts so we could not do it. And even in terms of the Barbados black belly sheep, for instance, I mean, we talk about this a lot. We talk about the fact that because of some of the unique properties, it can work. But, I get amazed sometimes. We as Barbadians, we tend to think, we need to protect it. That is true. But what we need to protect is the research capabilities, and we need to strengthen it. We are not doing enough in providing those research facilities and using the talent that we have among our Barbadians to actually work and do it because they were doing it in the past, certainly, but it needs resources in order to get it done. So
On this issue of research,
Yes.
sorry for crossing you,
Go ahead.
but I have to make sure that we balance the scales. I know you can go on for a long, long time, but we have to balance the scales.
Well, no
So
problem.
we will come back to you because I do want to hear more about the seed varieties and how that whole process works. It's always been a curiosity of mine. But I want to lean in more on this issue of research and pose this question to you, Mr. Murray. The Barbados Meteorological Services certainly is in a position to be more research-focused by rights of the work that you do. What are some of the investments that you've made in recent times, or what do you have planned as it relates to research, data, and information gathering, and the types of instruments that you have at your disposal?
First of all, I want to say is that the biggest investment that we have made so far is the construction of our three-dimensional printed automatic weather stations. And
3D printing.
Yes, please. And the reason why I say that is because in years gone past, we only had probably about 1 or 2 commercial stations that would take the air temperature, relative humidity, rainfall, and so on at the airport. And in the past, we had relied on manual readings from plantations in terms of rainfall, but obviously, that will not be enough. The thing is that with these stations that we are now installing in the field, and we are aiming to go for 100 of these stations, we, in time, will have enough data that can get climatological averages from the areas that we have these stations in.
So your 3D printing devices, what are these devices called?
No, these are the automatic weather stations that we have mentioned on previous discussions.
Automatic weather stations.
Right.
Right.
3D pause is just that help us spell it out plainly, so that the public will understand what they are.
And you've dispersed them across the island, so you have more places where you're capturing weather data.
Yes, please.
How many of them do you have installed at present?
Oh, so around 70. As a matter of fact, there's one to my right out at the St. George Primary School at the corner. So when you leave, you'll be able to see it at the corner. So it is working at the moment. There's also one down at the Roberts Manufacturing Company down in Lower State, and there's also one in Constant Plantation out in St. George. So they're all over the place.
And what do these automatic weather stations do? Or how do you get information from them?
As what have been mentioned in previous discussions, they collect data. They collect rainfall, air temperature, the maximum air temperature, the minimum air temperature, the wind direction, wind speed, and solar radiation. And that's what these stations do. We collect the data and we compile it so that we can do our maps on our Barbados, our climate outlook newsletter, and much, much more.
So essentially then, you're not just taking the information from the airport anymore. And I know we've said this before in previous sessions, but for those who weren't here, in the past, you would hear there was X amount of rainfall at the airport, and most of us that live in inland would be like, it was pouring out by me, was these 2 inches. But now, based on what you're saying, with these 3D printed automated weather systems that you're dispersing around the island, you can basically give us weather updates in a more nuanced way, almost by parish or even more intense, because you say you have, what, 70 of them, right?
I want to reiterate is that you still have to take rainfall from the airport for the purpose of letting the public know what's actually falling at the airport, or I would say at Charnox. But in our weather discussions, when you go online, we will also mention the areas that we see significant rainfall, especially when you have flash flood watches or warnings. If there's any significant weather event that took place across the island, the station that captures that data within that area will also be mentioned in that discussion. So the airport is not left out. We still have to send out that information every day, 365/7.
For international
Purposes.
compliance purposes,
Yes.
agreed. So folks, when you leave here, you can check the Barbados Meteorological Services social media. They have been sharing this information. For example, I believe I saw a map recently that was issued where you would have seen there was rainfall condensed more in the northern part of the island. So those of us who might be working in the city, that might not have applied to you, but certainly people who live and work in the north would have been grateful for that forecast information. So kudos to the Barbados Meteorological Services for making that investment. Is there any other software or equipment? I saw Sabu on the news. Sorry, Mr. Best, the director, our favorite weatherman, with this gigantic sphere that was glowing blue, and it was giving him weather information. It looked very fancy. Can you tell us more about that?
It is called a digital sphere, and it can be used for a lot of things, not only to display the weather on it, it can also be displayed to show other stuff, especially if you have tours of the office, so that the children or the students will be more interested. So it is not just for displaying weather. So think of it as a computer screen wrapped around into a circle.
So it can track things like haze as well? Or no?
It can track haze as long as we set it to the appropriate website and the satellite. As a matter of fact, the satellite, depending on which satellite you use, well, obviously we use the Go 16 satellite. But in terms of using the correct template, you can actually see the haze coming across the Atlantic. And you also have models that will also show you where the haze is expected to be.
Sorry, did you say we're measuring that or we're not measuring that?
The BMS doesn't usually measure the haze, and that's usually done by CIMH, and they have a facility up at Rocky Point that usually measures the haze particles, and those particles coming across the Atlantic. But on the satellite, you can actually see the haze coming across when you use the visual satellite, and they have other websites where they have modeling that will show where the haze cloud is expected to be.
I guess what I'm asking through the moderator is it possible are these announcements made to the public, more importantly, are they made to the health sector that there's a haze cloud coming within X hours, for instance?
But I can say is that on our website now, we do make announcements for sure. In the event that we suspect that the haze is going to reduce visibility to about 15 kilometers or less, we usually send out statements, and the impact-based forecasting does come into play. And it sends to all the media houses, including the Government Information Service.
So I think one important action point might be that information needs to go to the health sector, because it influences planning. For instance, if haze is coming, all of the public health messages start going out, the emergency rooms start being prepared, all those sorts of things long before asthma attacks occur.
So what needs to be done is that you will have to contact us, so they can get your emails, and then whenever there is an event coming, then you'll also be included in the loop in terms of getting information.
Yeah, because that's an important missing gap.
This is why we have these sessions, folks, so that we can broker relationships and build bridges. Sharice, this next question is for you with respect to the extreme heat. I understand you're doing some research. How is your research on the heat going, by the way? And what are the types of notices? I understand the BMS has used terms lately like dangerous heat. But this is your wheelhouse, so we want to hear from you.
The overarching thing from this year has been that the Atlantic has been warmer than usual. So because the Atlantic is warmer than usual, the island is also warmer than usual. That's the first part of it. Second part of it is that with a warmer ocean, the lower part of the atmosphere at least, tends to be warmer. And a warmer atmosphere holds a little bit more water vapor. So it's a little more humid. So you feel hotter. So it's hotter and you're feeling hotter. Additionally, especially in September, With the warmer Atlantic, we had a lot of tropical cyclones in the Atlantic basin that eroded the Atlantic high pressure system that resulted in long periods of very light winds. So it's warmer, it feels warmer, and then the light winds are also not giving much relief. That is essentially what happened over the last few months. The last part of your question.
I can't remember either.
And
It was something, oh, you used the term dangerous heat.
Yes, please.
In a recent update. And I would like you to contextualize that for our benefit.
With the conditions being warmer, harder for you to cool yourself. That's why we said it's dangerous.
So dangerous heat starts at what temperature? Because I've been seeing, when I get in my vehicle, I see the temperature. I've seen as high as 35 recently on my gauge, and I wonder if that's coming from the engine or if that's really outside.
There are parts of the island that have gotten to 35 degrees Celsius. The issue is our instruments measure air temperature. With how it feels outside, the air temperature might be 35 degrees Celsius, but it feels like it's 40 or 50 degrees Celsius. So that's why we use the term dangerous heat, because it's going to be harder for our body to regulate our temperature if outside feels really hot.
And we've heard extensively today from our health representative the signs and the actions that we should take when we hear these notices being issued with respect to the heat. So you've touched already on your seasonal forecasting efforts and your newsletter that is issued monthly. Are there any other types of information that the BMS puts out, and where can persons access these forecasts?
Currently, we only do, like I would have mentioned earlier, rainfall, temperature, drought forecasts. Climate services, we tend to take data as well. So if, like my colleague in the health sector said, well, we're seeing more heat illnesses in the Bridgetown area, we now have data that we could potentially have a small study saying, well, the temperatures in the Bridgetown area are more conducive to more heat illnesses. And that's just temperature. We can also do that with rainfall.
Air quality.
The CIMH also does air quality. BMS at this moment doesn't do air quality.
So this next question is for either you or Mr. Murray, Charisse. The sectors that we have represented here, we've heard that there is a desire for greater collaboration with you. Have you begun to discuss this internally, and what are some of the perhaps plans that you have to support these sectors? I know you communicate publicly to the seafarers, the fishermen, and so on within the agricultural sector, but what perhaps might be in the works with respect to having more sector-related updates or communication?
I will answer that question. I would say that we are currently involved in having these outreach programs with the sectors that's mostly like water, disaster management, agriculture, and I would like to have the health sector on board too, because I think that we can have a very good relationship in terms of data sharing and sharing of information, so that you can make the link between a spike in vector borne diseases in relation to like a spike in the maximum air temperature or rainfall. Right now, we are already involved in some partnerships, and I would say the Barbados Water Authority is one, and they have been grateful, to have some of our 3D printing weather stations across on some of their locations, because they are also in a position, to monitor the rainfall pattern, and at the same time, they will be in a better position to plan, to rationalize their water if the rainfall levels go down to a very dangerously lower level. In agriculture, we also collaborate with CIMH and the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security. They got a few projects going on at this time. And we also collaborate with DEM, especially with the impact-based forecasting, where, we have a very good relationship, in terms of trying to reduce, disasters, and at the same time, to keep the public informed on what to do and what not to do. So a lot is going on at the moment in terms of we are trying to, have a better outreach, so that we can have a much safer, better informed Barbados.
Thank you so much. Folks, I'm going to stick a pin here and invite you to ask any questions of our panel. We would have heard about health and climate, agriculture and climate. You have a question, sir? Okay, we have a microphone up here. You want to come so that the online audience can hear you? Was that he saying that he already got a big voice? Oh, and hopefully not seen?
Yes. Good evening to everyone.
Good
here
evening.
And online. I want to go back a little bit to the whole conversation of research. And I want to focus more on the two sectors rather than my colleagues at the Met Service, well, my collaborators. Now, the role of any Met Service, one of them at least, is to provide early warning, right? So, we heard your response with respect to the relevance of the information coming out of, for example, the Barbados Met Service. The question is, what makes it relevant? What makes it relevant is when the information suggests not what will happen with rain or temperature, but what it means for you in the health sector or in the agriculture sector. What is the impact? You asked a very good question, but I don't think it was answered. What does it mean to have dangerous heat? Yeah. What is the temperature? Do we know? All that takes research. What are the significant thresholds that need to be forecasted that would make a difference for you too? That's the direction we are currently going. But you know what we need to help with that? In order to understand impacts forecasting and get the forecast that's relevant to you, we need your data. Not just their data. Their data tells you about the environment. When we put your data with that, it tells us of the impact of that environment on you. And that's what we need to forecast. And that's the direction we're going. What's your response in the two sectors to such information?
You know, I really want to agree with you wholeheartedly. I can tell you why. You know, every year, this might give me a little rough here, but my people a little rough. But anyway, I don't mind. You hear, whenever a farmer has an issue, like stock farm especially, it's either the feed, the chicks. There's three things: your feed, your chicks, and the environment. Okay? What's most important? All three are important. In other words, what kind of feed, the genetic quality of what you're dealing with, and your environment. But your environment changes. Weather. How, for instance, sometimes what they do is that in terms of the type of feed that you are mentioning, the amount of water that you drink, do we adjust feed ingredients according to the weather situation, if you get where I'm coming from? What levels of research are we doing here that says, for instance, the way in which we are feeding our animals is really based on Western prescriptions up there that tells us this is what it is? Are we using local knowledge in terms of during particular times of the year, this is what you need to do? But you know what people has got this thing, you know, that they tell you got to use certain times. For us, big people, human beings, that's a fact, okay? But there's no science, there's no research to back up to say, well, this is when you do it, all right? And do we have something that combines all of that data from the weather side, okay, and from, say, the animals, the user side, the farmer side, to say, well, okay, how do we put it together to give the best advice? So that, for instance, even in terms of feed manufacturing, that we basically respond or put things in there that makes a difference. All of these issues, but we're not doing it, right? And that is the problem. We are not bringing it together and doing it. We are operating as with little castles, beautifully built, looking good, and they're producing enough nice information and put it up in the stars and it look nice. But the point is really, how are we utilizing it in a way that says we are respecting each other for where our competencies are, okay, and using the competencies that each of us have to make each other better. That is not, we're not doing that, and that is, I think that is a worry.
Dr. Connell, I know you want to jump in here, but sorry, you wanted to respond? I was hoping that maybe the Met Office might want to make a contribution to the point that was raised. If not, we will move on to Dr. Connell's comment.
I think maybe I should respond because I guess your response is going to be to the sectors that are kind of, so just make, okay, so UV isn't on here, but there's a lot of talk about research, which is good, and in 2023, research has taken on a whole different meaning because everyone now does research, but proper structured research requires investment. And yes, you could have the most willing students there to do the research. You can have a campus there that is research driven. But if you don't have the investments, then research cannot occur. The reason why research occurs in more developed countries is because they have research funding. So even into genetics, that's going to take some funding, and funding comes from either privately or non-private. So that's research. But what I like the question because I think what it drives home is that the Met Office, I'm going to use the colloquial term, might be producing data but not information. The data now has to be translated so that the various sectors can understand it and create relevance within the sector. Now take for instance an app on my iPhone, right? I can just look, or I'm just going to say smartphone, I'm not going to give a brand, too late. But looking at the app, it gives me the temperature, the minimum temperature, the maximum temperature, something about percentage risk of rainfall. And if I scroll down, so it tells me about the UV index, what it feels like, humidity, precipitation, visibility. These are things that I am interested in health. So for instance, the haze of air quality is something health is going to be very interested in. It's not just data now, it's information. So I disagree with you that what's needed is more outreach. What is needed is more use of your external stakeholders to climate and the environment. You need to now create a platform where we are all able to understand the relevance of your data in our sector and to use it as information. And just to use technology again, take artificial intelligence. There are apps now where you can, for instance, say to someone on their smartphone, okay, so send me your peak flow, which is a measure of how well you're breathing with asthma, right? Send me that data. And based on that, it might say to you, okay, you need to increase your inhaler use. Think about how far it's gone. It can now use GPS to say, based on your location or the location of your phone, it looks the air quality where you are is not that great. You need to increase the use of your inhaler because you're probably going to have an asthma attack in the next 24 hours. So you see what I mean? You've converted environmental data into health information.
So if I could just interject here, and I know the Met Office team, and I want to perhaps create a wicket for them. You would think I'm a real big cricket fan, right? This second time I'm talking about wickets tonight. I believe that's the direction the impact-based forecasting is going in terms of turning data into information, as you so eloquently put it. I also want to perhaps caution us in terms of the extent to which we speak so glowingly about apps and the technology that's available, which sometimes runs counter to the messaging that the Met Office is putting out, not necessarily as accurate as they are, and certainly the safety implications of persons perhaps relying on this information rather than on the Met Office. But I don't work there, so I'm just a cheerleader. I will hand it over. I believe Samelka wanted to make an interjection.
But then, of course, the problem is not the app. The problem is the Met Office needs an app that's easily accessible so that the go-to app becomes the
So
Met Office's app.
let the Barbados Meteorological Services respond.
I will speak on this one. So we have the BMS Insight app.
The BMS what?
BMS Insight.
I'm going to look for it.
Available on Android only.
Oh,
So what you need to do is you gotta have to buy.
Brian, I hear batting for you.
You
though.
gotta have to buy an Android phone so you can have the BMS Insight app on it.
so the Apple people don't deserve to know about the weather? The iPhone people? You see, no, but it's on a serious note, that is the point. The reason I use the weather app is because it happens to be on my iPhone and it's there. It might not be the most reliable, but at least I can check and see what.
Yeah, but according to Madam Moderator, with our Insight app, what that does is that when you open that app, it is going to direct you to the nearest automatic weather station within the facility. For instance, if I go on this phone, or this phone, I could actually it will actually take me to the weather station at St. George Primary School, and it will tell you the present temperature, relative humidity, rainfall, wind direction, wind speed, and if we have any watches or warnings or average out, it will be mentioned that also.
So this app is accurate, is what you're saying? Because you're saying it's.
As accurate as it can be because it is made by the BMS.
So I'm pretty good with my weather app.
Yes, it's pretty good for your weather app. Give it up.
So I just want to interject here. Samalka Japman, the senior meteorologist at the Met Office. So there was a lot of conversation just now. Mr. Trotman, he's with the climate section at CMH, which is the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, and they work a lot with research. That is why he was driving at certain points, of course, which are really relevant. And then to bring it back to the Met Services perspective, where our mandate is obviously different from CMH, and we would now look at the forecasting, especially at a national level. So I did speak about the collaboration between sectors. So as Sharice and Brian rightly mentioned, we have climate services and we look at sector-specific services. So you spoke about, Dr. Connell, was in relation to impact-based forecasting, because we're not just looking at what the weather is, but what it's going to do and what it's going to do to each sector. There is going to be a different look for the general public, although you're a farmer in the general public, and there's going to be a different look from the stakeholder aspect and as it relates to your organizations or the ministries associated with a particular sector. So sectors, health, agriculture, energy, disaster management, as my colleagues mentioned. So as Brian said, we are working with stakeholders and meeting with the sectors, and that came out just now in the conversation as it relates to not just what the Met Office has as it relates to data, but also what you have as it relates to data. I can tell you what the temperatures are, what we are seeing, what we are forecasting, whether it's daily or seasonally, and then from the perspective, obviously, for long-term climate, which would go into the realm of CMH. But then we need to know from you and your sectors, what are the thresholds? What are the thresholds as it relates to heat? How is that relevant to health when it is really going to be the dangerous heat? Because you need to tell us about the body. We are not experts in the body, we're experts in the weather. So then when we take it to that national level and we interact with the sectors, which is exactly what we are doing now, having that interaction with the sectors so that we could better produce products that are centered towards you, whether it's on a stakeholder level or centered towards you, whether it's on the public level. We've done a lot more in past times as it relates to the public and understanding what the public would like and how we could improve on our messaging for the general public. But we realize now that we have to take that to the next step, especially with our stakeholders. So then the farmers and the doctors, they understand what the Met Office is saying. It's not just the case of you getting the advisories, but then how are you going to plan ahead? You mentioned about the hospital, what procedures you need to put in place. We do our climate outlook. We talk about the temperatures. Are you accessing that information is the questions that we're going to ask you. And then what more information you might want, because I might just be thinking, oh, you want temperatures for heat, but then you might be saying, I want to know more. I want more information that you may have. You might not even know that we have, because we do the dust forecasting, we do rainfall, we do thunderstorms, we do marine. Then you have that conversation with us, and we can build products that are better suited to the relevant sectors.
I would love to be a fly on the wall when you all have your meeting. I think it will be very productive, if not robust. But definitely, we would have said in the very beginning, we have provided this platform for you, the public, for exactly this reason, to see what are the bridges that we need to build, where can greater collaboration benefit different stakeholders, and it is lovely for us, especially in terms of how relevant health and agriculture are to us on a day-to-day basis, to hear that there are these opportunities for greater collaboration. We have just about passed the 2-hour mark, so are there any other questions? Ricky, did we have any questions online? No questions online.
Margaret, I just wanted to say, though, that I think what was just said is critical. Because unless you have these conversations with the the stakeholders, then your impact forecast is at risk of not being impactful. Because you want the consumers of that data to be able to, one, to consume information that's relevant, and also to give you information so that you now may consider other things, data points for us. So this is something we always get around in health, by the way. So let me just make that disclaimer. We always think that financing is only interested in heart attack rates when they're really interested in costs to treat a heart attack, right? So this is something I think you need to really, as a matter of priority, work on.
Right. So that is how we initiated our impact-based forecasting, by having stakeholder meetings and getting impact from the various sectors as it relates to what we forecast and monitor. But it's then a case of, we started in 2020, so obviously the plans would have been leading up to 2020. We did it, it's going well, but of course we always think at the Met Office about reassessing, analyzing, see what went well, what didn't go well, how can we improve, and that's where we are at. And we're talking about climate. Then we have been building out our climate section, so not just looking at short-term forecasting, but now we're looking at the seasonal forecasting, and that is where we are as it relates to those sector-specific messaging for a seasonal perspective. And we can see that it's critical to have not just short-term forecasts for planning purposes, but to understand what is happening for the long term. So it is definitely something we've always been doing, and we will continue to do and continue to build. And coming out of these panel discussions is definitely good to be able to interact with the sectors. We had a panel discussion where tourism was there. Since then, we had a meeting with BHTA regarding what the tourism sector will want, because we didn't have such a close relationship with them. So hopefully that's where we will go from this panel discussion with health and agriculture.
Goes without saying. Are there any other questions?
Here here.
Agreed. I'm an iPhone user too, but
Here, here.
I can't change teams in the middle of the game.
So if I can interject, the BMS Insight app is only one way to get information from the BMS. We also have social media pages. We're on Instagram, Facebook,
No, but
Twitter.
who's going to do that? Who's going to go through a social media page and look for the, I tap on the cloud on my thing because it looks like a cloud and I figure it's related to weather. And then I pull up what's happening that day.
There's also the CapCap app that will send alerts to both Android and iPhone
But that's
users.
that's alert messaging. That's a different type of messaging. I should be able to get up and say, okay, what's the weather issues or data that I need to know of happening in Barbados today? And I want the most reliable one, which is from the Barbados Meteorological Service. And here's the app, and just click on it. But no pressure.
Well, we will take all the feedback, and of course, we do understand the limitations of our app. That was never a question before, because of course, persons both have Android and iPhone. So that is a limitation we have, and it is something that we've been looking at and using other avenues to send information to the
Cost
public.
as well, yeah.
If it's one thing I have to say, what Samelka said is not a sporadic fact. It is a consistency with the Barbados Meteorological Services that they do take feedback and act on it very proactively. So we can look forward, coming out of this session, to some development with respect to the issues and the concerns raised. So we will give you the ample time in order to do that, but we are confident that you listen. You're an organization that listens, and the fact that you've partnered with the DEM to invest in a session like this, to open yourselves up to even questioning, says a lot about the perspective on communication and receiving feedback at the organization at large. At this point, folks, I would like to invite all of our panelists to issue their closing comments so that we can wrap up this very intriguing discussion on the influence of climate and agriculture on human health. I want to start with Mr. Murray, Deputy Director of the Barbados Meteorological Services.
I want to say thanks to everyone that has tuned in to this very important discussion on climate and health. And I would say that we had a very robust discussion because we have actually seen how climate can have an impact on the health of an individual or family or group. And I want to end here on a fun note. Now, as years ago, I say in a previous workshop that climate change is like a very slow poison. And I said that because you do not notice it at first, because you figure, well, things are not going to happen, but we are now seeing things happening. We are seeing more extreme hurricanes, we are seeing more extreme events, and we have to be aware of that. So we have now come to the conclusion that climate change is slowly happening, slowly but surely, and there's data that shows that you're having an increase in the maximum and minimum temperatures. We have to be aware, and we have to be prepared for any eventuality, and at the same time, we have to be careful and make sure that no one gets injured or affected by these extreme events. And at the same time, it is up to the individual, families, and businesses and entities to be educated on climate change and the impacts on the human aspect of it. And I cannot leave out agriculture. And that is it for me. Thank you.
Chronologically, so over to you, Ms. Brathwaite, meteorologist with the Barbados Meteorological Services.
I'd like to thank everyone, firstly, for attending the panel discussion. I will close by saying that you can access our seasonal forecasts on our website. www.barbadosweather.org. That's for both health and agriculture. Thank
And
you.
I believe you can put a bookmark or icon on your iPhone home screen, right, Dr. Connell?
Yeah,
Over to you for your closing
just
remarks.
another step. So thank you. I think this was a very useful discussion, certainly because it brought stakeholders together on one stage, literally.
You have to speak up.
Oh, I've never had that before. Okay, so I think it was an interesting discussion. It brought stakeholders together, and it certainly it was solution focused, I think. Let me just close by saying there is no human health without planetary health. And as much as we think that we are just in control of our environment influences our health every single day, including today. The fact that on social media we are hearing comments such as we are possibly living in the coolest days of our future should set off alarm bells because we have to make drastic changes because climate change is probably occurring at a faster rate than we predicted. To those of you out there listening, I hope that you've consumed water during this broadcast. And I also hope that you will take steps as of tonight, notice I didn't say tomorrow, to make sure that you adjust the climate wherever you are so that you can have a healthier week ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Connell. And for our final panelists and your closing remarks, Mr. James Paul, CEO of the Barbados Agricultural Society.
Okay, first of all, I'm just thanks for inviting me, and I think, we've learned a lot. But what is more important, I would like to think, is that we can start at least a process where we can do more with what we have. The truth is really that if we are serious about food security in our country, we've got to utilize what we have available to us in the best possible way. And clearly, we have not been doing that. But we have to take what we have seriously. And it is only by interacting in a more serious manner and providing information and taking the information that we have and using it in a very effective manner that we can see gains in terms of meeting those food security goals that we speak about. And of course, achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, goal number 15 that we speak about so much. But I want to thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. Am I allowed to give closing comments? I do want to echo the sentiments of those who've been clamoring for more research. I also want to side with the notion that research costs lots and lots of money. And I believe that's why our Prime Minister has been canvassing globally for a more equitable global financial architecture to ensure that we're able to pay for not only the research, but the mitigation efforts that we need to be able to not only, as Mr. Paul would have noted, meet the Sustainable Development Goals, but certainly to protect the quality of life that we have here in Barbados at a more granular level in terms of what we have done here today with respect to the climate emergency. This is just one of many steps that the Barbados Meteorological Services and the Department of Emergency Management continues to take to ensure that they listen to what the public has on their minds and their hearts as it relates to what is needed to be able to cater more to your needs so that we remain prepared together. And on that note, I want to encourage you to continue to participate, because the only way that we can move forward effectively is together. There's a saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Thank you so much.